Mr. Speaker. Here we go again. Another spring, another motion from the Liberal government to sit until midnight. In fact, it's exactly the same motion for midnight sittings that the Liberals used last year. It also has the same flaws that last year's motion contained, and quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, the issues dominating debate in the House are pretty much the same. Last spring, the Prime Minister was under investigation, an ethical investigation.
Which one?
This spring, now that the Ethics Commissioner has found the Prime Minister guilty in 4 different ways, it's the Prime Minister's friend, the Fisheries Minister, who is embroiled in what has become known as clam scam. And of course, the Finance Minister is under investigation as well. So, boy oh boy, round and round we go. Last spring, the Liberals were getting ready to ram through the House major changes to the way that Parliament works. All to their benefit, of course, because the Liberals never do anything unless it's going to benefit them. Conservatives fought tooth and nail when the Liberals tried to ram those changes through that would erode our democracy. Well, this spring, it's the very rules that elect members of Parliament to this House which the Liberals are now trying to rig and to rush those changes through Parliament as we speak. We see this time and time again, Mr. Speaker. When the Liberals are failing at something, they try to change the rules to benefit themselves. Last spring, the Liberals tabled a budget with a runaway deficit and no balanced budget in sight for decades. This spring, another whopping deficit and still no plan to bring the budget back to balance. And with today's announcement of another $4.5 billion to buy a pipeline, an old 60-year-old pipeline, which didn't need government money. We already had a private investor that was putting billions into it and creating jobs, but now the federal government is giving them $4.5 billion to take down to Houston. Who knows what the cost will be to build this pipeline? And let's remember, the federal government isn't that good at building really much of anything. Look at their record on ships, on planes, the Phoenix system. So I don't really trust this government to build anything. But I do digress, Mr. Speaker, my point being more and more and more billions of taxpayers' dollars that this Liberal drunken sailor government is spending.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, questionable ethics, self-serving rule rigging, taxing and spending. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Now let me turn to the principle of government motion number 22. Let me be clear, Conservatives believe in hard work. We believe in doing hard work rather than just talking about it. We don't have a problem at all with working a little extra in the spring. And in fact, it's something that, in fact, is an annual ritual around here. We usually do work harder in the spring as we gear up for the summer. The last Conservative government had also asked the House of Commons to put in some extra hours in the spring. But one thing that we never did in government was to steal time for government business on opposition days. This government, though, Mr. Speaker, did this last year and is proposing and probably going to ram it through and going to do it again this year. Now, let me just explain once again for our constituents who are watching what this means. Now, paragraph J of the motion, 22, would shortchange the opposition, so both the Conservatives and the New Democratic parties on the only four opposition days that we have left remaining this spring. Now, let me just offer a quick explanation. Over the course of 1 year, in the rules of the House of Commons, it requires the government to set aside 22 sitting days for discussion of topics of the opposition choosing. So 22 days in total for the NDP and the Conservatives to talk about issues that they believe are important. We get to discuss that opposition topic all day, regardless of whether it's a short sitting day like Wednesdays when we have our caucus meetings, or on longer days like Tuesdays. We debate the opposition topic all day. That's why we call them opposition days. It simply doesn't matter how long the day is. We get to debate our opposition topic from the beginning of the day to the end of the day. And you may recall, Mr. Speaker, we brought forward some very important topics during our opposition days, topics like support for Kinder Morgan, which interestingly this government voted against when we brought that topic forward. Now they're buying it. That's quite something. We brought forward very important topics like helping Yazidi girls and women who were victims of ISIS terrorists, We've brought forward motions supporting Israel. There's been a number of topics, Mr. Speaker, that we've brought forward on these opposition days. And so, as I said, it doesn't matter how long that day is, it is our day. So if the government is asking the opposition to work longer days, we're fine with that. It only makes sense, and it's only fair that the government is also willing to discuss the opposition topics on those longer days as well. But they're not willing to do that. So even though we're going to be sitting longer hours, according to Motion 22, on the days that we have an opposition day, and we only have, actually, we have 2 left. I believe the NDP have 2 as well. On those days, the government is going to stop us from talking about the issue that we brought forward earlier on, probably 5:30, 6:30 in the day. So the government will then continue with their business for the rest of the day, but we as opposition can't talk about the topic that we brought forward. Now, we don't have a lot of days to do it, and those days are important. And again, Mr. Speaker, let me just remind you that when we were in government, we didn't do that. We might have sat a little longer in the spring, but opposition days also went longer in the spring. And it's really unbelievable that this Prime Minister who got elected promising to respect parliamentarians disrespects the job that we do here so much that he won't even let opposition days on these longer sitting hours be debated. But wait, didn't the Prime Minister recently fly down to New York and encourage people to listen to those who disagree with them?
Oh, that.
In fact, I think I remember that coverage. Wasn't it our Prime Minister standing at second base in Yankee Stadium with hand on heart?
Again.
And that, Mr. Speaker, we've come to learn is the Prime Minister's telltale sign that sanctimony and hypocrisy will soon be following. Nonetheless, there he was telling university graduates about the importance of tolerating and listening to other people's views. However, our do as I say, not as I do Prime Minister has a different attitude when he comes back to his own country and to our House of Commons. The Liberal Prime Minister who claims to believe in tolerating other people's views, which, by the way, let's not forget he's imposed a values test on Canadians and on organizations who are just looking for a little bit of help to hire a summer student. Yeah, those views he doesn't want to listen to. Their views he's not going to tolerate. Their views have to be shut down because this Prime Minister doesn't think they're worthy of listening to. He'll go to the U.S. and lecture people in the United States about listening to other people's views, but he comes back to Canada and he does the exact opposite. Yeah. Unbelievable.
What a hypocrite.
The same Liberal Prime Minister sure didn't seem to have tolerance for opposing views when he fired the former chair of the Fisheries Committee, the honourable member for Costa Bay's Central Notre Dame, because he disagreed with the Prime Minister over the summer jobs values test. The same Prime Minister kicked the honourable member of St. John Rothsey off the committees as punishment for disagreeing with the Prime Minister about his dangerous and reckless plan for small business tax changes. Shameful. Remember all of that? And remember the feminist Prime Minister, this one was particularly galling for me, ordered his MPs to veto the election of the honourable member for Lethbridge, who was duly elected to this House of Commons as chair of the Status of Women Committee, a role which is filled by by nomination of the official opposition, because he didn't agree with her views on an issue of personal conscience. So he was telling an elected member of Parliament which she can think, which she can believe, which she can hold dear to her heart. Utter hypocrisy. Sadly, this sort of behaviour isn't limited to just the Prime Minister. And I don't think all members in the Liberal caucus are this way. Let me be very clear. I don't think all of the Liberal MPs are like this. But I think, sadly, a lot of them are seeing their leader do it, and they're thinking it's giving them permission to do the same thing. Leadership, Mr. Speaker, starts at the top. It's not just a cliche, it is true. An organization's culture is often shaped and molded, and the signal is sent by the boss. The fact of life is it's no different with this government. The Minister of Environment and Climate Change was on national television just a few weekends ago, saying she has no time for politicians who disagree with her, no time. Earlier this spring, the Minister of Finance called our deputy leader, the honourable member from Milton.
This was epic. Yeah.
Halton, a Neanderthal. because she didn't agree with him. A Neanderthal. No apology, no outrage. It was just, I will say that they'll say one thing and do something completely different. And now we have the government House Leader bringing forward a motion that cuts off debate on opposition motions. No longer will they be opposition days, but opposition half-days. The Prime Minister apparently can't stomach having to listen to opposition ideas for a few extra hours. Maybe, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister shouldn't have flown off to New York City to give a sermon on tolerance of different opinions. Maybe he should be reflecting on his own words. And at next week's Cabinet meeting, maybe lay his hand on his heart and give the same speech to all of his colleagues. Certainly that disrespect which they have been showing for ideas is matched by the disrespect they have for Parliament. Not just leaks of legislation, though, where the Liberals have decided to hinder Parliament. The Prime Minister is ordering, and Mr. Speaker, this is something we haven't talked about recently, but it's incredibly important, and Parliament has not been consulted. And that's ordering Canadian troops into harm's way as part of a United Nations mission in the West African nation of Mali. In a breach of tradition and practice, he's refusing to consult Parliament on this deployment. The seriousness of this deployment of our soldiers into an active war zone, widely considered to be the most dangerous UN mission in the entire world today, warrants a debate and it warrants a vote here in the House of Commons. Again, though, the Prime Minister doesn't want to hear any voices that might disagree with him, that might challenge him, that it might ask him questions that he has no answer for. The Prime Minister, instead of doing what a leader does and taking the heat that comes with leadership, refuses to show the respect that our soldiers and this House, but mostly, Mr. Speaker, our soldiers deserve.
And their families.
Their families, Mr. Speaker, their families deserve respect. Mr. Speaker, on the security front, all of us, indeed all Canadians, have the vivid memory of the fiasco, which was the Prime Minister's journey to India in February. The fumbling and the flailing around that we saw from the government and from the Prime Minister in the days which followed led to a full-blown diplomatic incident with our ally India, the largest democracy in the world. Conservatives wanted the National Security Advisor, Daniel Jean, to appear before a parliamentary committee to explain how those conspiracy theories came to be and the comments that he made to the media. You will recall this, Mr. Speaker. For weeks and weeks, the media, because we'd seen media reports about Daniel Jean telling them that India had been part of this so-called conspiracy theory, we wanted to talk to him. So we wanted him to explain what was going on when a man convicted of attempted murder of a former Indian minister was invited to pal around and hang around with the Liberals at the swanky parties in India, which, by the way, we've got a question on the order paper on that, Mr. Speaker, and the government won't tell us how much it costs because they're saying, well, there's just so many departments we've got to go look into to find out how much did all those parties cost.
National security.
Pretty sure they cost a whole lot of money. We're not going to give up getting those answers because taxpayers deserve to know. But, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister was going to have nothing to do with that kind of that exercise in accountability. Remember the Liberal convention in Halifax last month where the party's outgoing president, the same Anna Gainey who joined the Prime Minister on his illegal vacation on billionaire private Caribbean island? Well, that Anna Gainey told delegates that now more than ever, we need to have his back, referring to the Prime Minister. Well, just a few weeks before that, the Liberal caucus got a taste of having the Prime Minister's back. The Liberal whip told the Liberal backbench that they needed to have the Prime Minister's back and they'd have to be voting for close to 40 hours. They would have to have his back by voting down the Opposition Day motion to have the National Security Advisor appear at committee. Then they'd have to have his back by voting and voting and voting and voting and voting for potentially up to 40 hours. Oh, that was quite something, Mr. Speaker. They were not going to give in. You know, and at the end of all of that, oh, Captain, our Captain, they were cheering on the Prime Minister. And then what was it, a week later? Okay, they realized they better give this make sure the national security appears, and who appeared? Lo and behold, miraculously. I just wonder how good it felt for the Liberal backbench to have the Prime Minister's back. After all that was said and done, after the extreme pressure laid on by our amazing Conservative team, the government relented. The National Security Advisor appeared at the Public Safety Committee. It must be so fulfilling, so rewarding to be part of the Liberal caucus when things like that happen. It must make them proud to go home and tell their constituents what they were doing. Only 4 minutes left.
You're on a roll.
Okay, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Liberals wanted to change the way the government... Okay, I've got one more thing I'm going to mention. The Liberals wanted to change the way the government asks for spending permission and the way the House of Commons studies these spending proposals. And that's what has brought us to where the main estimates have changed. And this year, Mr. Speaker, it includes the main estimates, a single $7 billion lump sum under the buzz phrase, budget implementation. The government claimed it would be focused on initiatives announced in this year's budget, though the wording provides no assurance. Again, Mr. Speaker, they're ramming this through. And the Parliamentary Budget Officer, a dedicated public servant who has had a long career here on Parliament Hill, told a Senate committee he's never seen anything like it. Basically, let me summarize. I'll tell you what he said, and I quote, "While the government has included a new budget implementation vote for $7 billion, the initiatives to be funded through this vote are not reflected in the departmental plans. Hence, there remains a lack of alignment between the budget initiatives and planned results." Let me summarize that. Liberal slush fund. That's what the $7 billion amounts to. Mr. Speaker, there's so many more things I could go on talking about. Last year, the government tried to ram through changes to the standing orders. They wanted to eliminate Friday sittings. They didn't want the Prime Minister didn't want to be here to answer questions. Of course, the list goes on. Is there a pattern here, Mr. Speaker? Yes, there is. When the chips are down for this Liberal government, their go-to move is to change the game, to rig the rules, to tilt the scales in their favour, always to regain and to have their own advantage. We've seen a pattern, and I will close with this, in Bill C-76, the so-called Election Modernization Act. Here's what's happening, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is having a hard time raising money. Even with his cash for access, his policies are so bad, people who have supported the Liberal Party for generations can't support it anymore because this Liberal policy, and I think Kinder Morgan today is going to be another example to these lifelong Liberals. Liberal policy is so bad, it is so destructive to our competitiveness, it's so destructive to our foreign relations that longtime Liberals are done writing checks to the party. So the Prime Minister can't raise money anymore, so what's he going to do? He's changing the election rules in Bill C-76 so that third-party funding can flow before the election, can flow and can help him, but he's limiting the ability for parties who have raised money, who have had people donate willingly to their party, those parties, like the Conservatives, because we actually have had a lot of people, hundreds of thousands of people support us through their financial donations. But the Prime Minister says, no, I don't like it because I can't raise money because I'm doing such a terrible job. I'm such a failure. Nobody wants to donate to my party. But the Leader of the Opposition, our leader, is doing well. The Conservatives are doing well. Good ideas, stable, strong ideas. We're getting donations from our supporters right across the country. So the Prime Minister says, I'm going to change the rules so they can't spend it. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has not learned that he can't get away with that. Mr. Speaker, I know he doesn't respect Parliament, but we do respect Parliament. I believe that members of Parliament who have been duly elected, in the end, will also respect and will follow through and do the right thing. I hope they accept our amendment, Mr. Speaker. All we are asking for is that on opposition days, we can have the same ability to be able to bring our issues forward, even if it's uncomfortable for the government, but it's called democracy. So even if the Prime Minister won't respect democracy, I sincerely ask my colleagues on the other side of the House that they will respect democracy, they will support our amendment, and we can finish the work that we are doing here in the House of Commons. Thank you. Mr.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Whitby. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for her speech. This is a classic case of where you see the Conservatives say one thing and do the other. The member spoke to, and I'll speak to this because she brought it up, our 40-hour voting spree that we had, and talking about supporting the Prime Minister's back. Well, I certainly do have his back, and I think our government, we support each other here. But she spoke about, the motions that she brought forward, speaking about women survivors of Daesh. Well, when it came to voting for funding to support those survivors of Daesh, they voted against it. They voted against that. You know what else they voted against, Mr. Speaker? They voted against ensuring that we reimburse First Nations for emergency management. They voted against funding for youth employment. They voted against. She talks about our defense and our military. They voted against funding to support Canada's defense policy. So, Mr. Speaker, when we talk about saying one thing and doing another, and actions probably speaking louder than words, I think the Conservatives have the market cornered on actions and how very void they are when it comes to supporting the things that they actually talk about.
Member for Portage-Lisker.
Well, a couple of issues there, and I do thank my honourable colleague. She addressed a couple of issues, so I'll begin with the first one, and that is on the marathon voting that had gone on here, and what had happened. Just so I can remind her and remind everybody, all we were asking for is that Daniel Jean come to the Public Safety Committee and testify. It was not unreasonable. It wasn't a brand new request. It was something that we had asked for, and we said that we are going to show you that we're serious, and so there will be a whole lot of votes because we believe it's very few tools that we have in opposition. One of the tools that we have is that we can have long extended votes, and we think that that's something we have to be able to do to show the government that we're serious. So, the Prime Minister slept wonderfully that night on his feather bed. He did come in, I think, at about 8 in the morning after we'd all been here, exhausted. He did come in 8 hours later. He looked refreshed. He was energized. I think he apparently brought
like
donuts, somebody said.
Just like a white night.
My point being, Mr. Speaker, and they're heckling me now. My point being, Mr. Speaker, on that marathon voting was in the end, Daniel Jean came to committee.
I just want to remind the honourable members two things. One, that we're not to speak of someone's presence in the House, whether they're here or not. And two, the honourable member, I don't want to name him, but I just want to make sure that he knows that if he's sitting next to a microphone and it's on, and the person who's speaking is trying to get a message across, it makes it hard for the rest of us to understand what she's saying. And I'm very interested in hearing what the honourable member has to say. The honourable member for Portage-Lisker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's like being a singer. Sometimes a backup singer does help. So I don't mind if the honourable member wants to be my backup singer.
Always.
But, Mr. Speaker, thank you for that. I guess my point to that honourable member is most of the Liberal members sat here. I saw them toiling away hour after hour after hour, and in the end, the government gave in. And I mean that this is something that they will have to make decisions on in the future. If their Prime Minister and the government's going to be giving in to what Canadians are asking for, they need to rethink how much they have his back. On the issue around voting on different measures, you also will recall during the 2015 election, remember the sanctimony we heard, when the Liberals win, we will never, ever use omnibus bills. We'll never use omnibus bills at all. And then, of course, they immediately started using omnibus bills. And not only omnibus bills on legislation around public safety, around justice issues, but, of course, in the budget. So they would throw everything but the kitchen sink in the budget. And then, of course, what they can do is say, oh, you didn't vote for this measure or for that measure. It's an old trick. They're an old party. They're the old party with the old tricks.
Exactly.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Jonquière.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais ça revenir à la motion, à l'amendement que le NPD a déposé concernant le compromis pour le prolongement des heures de la journée d'opposition. On parle beaucoup de démocratie. Bien, je crois que le fait de représenter notre circonscription et que l'opposition ait son mot à dire aussi fait partie de la démocratie. J'aimerais entendre ma collègue sur l'amendement que le NPD a déposé en cette Chambre et savoir qu'est-ce qu'elle en pense. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Lisker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for her question. I fully agree with her. You know, part of what makes our democracy so vibrant is the opposition, and it's something that I know I talk a lot with my constituents about the role that we play. When you look at an issue, for example, the small business tax changes that the government were going to be ramming through and penalizing so many of our hardworking men and women across the country, professionals as well as small business owners, farmers, you will recall that certainly those individuals and their voices were loud, but it was the voice of the opposition here in this place that was able to amplify that day in and day out. And in fact, we used things like opposition days. We used every tool that we had to ensure that the government knew that they couldn't ram those small business changes through. And you know, the problem is, Mr. Speaker, is when the government starts to erode the fundamentals of our democracy. You know, we've seen them do it with trying to erode people's fundamental right to beliefs and conscience, and then we see it here in this House when they try to erode our ability as opposition to do our job. It becomes a slippery slope. And it's about the government recognizing that the role we play, although it might be difficult for the government, it might be difficult for the Prime Minister, it's a vital role, and it's what makes our democracy vibrant. Now, Mr. Speaker, there are many times there are opposition motions that the NDP bring forward that we might not, Conservatives might not agree on. And then when the vote comes, that's when we have the chance to express that. During Q&A, questions and answers, during debates, we have the time to express that. That's when the government could express their displeasure with our opposition day motions. And in fact, they can defeat them every single time. But we should have the ability to bring them forward to ensure that they're talked about. And that's why if we have these days cut short, it's just disrespectful to opposition, whether it's Conservative or NDP or other opposition members.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Beauport-Côte-de-Beaupré, Île-d'Orléans, Charlevoix.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président, et je remercie ma collègue pour son magnifique discours. J'ai ici, dans la plateforme de 2015 des libéraux, un petit texte que je vais lire parce que je trouve ça tellement drôle et aujourd'hui encore plus que jamais. Prorogation et projet de loi omnibus. Nous n'userons pas de subterfuge législatif pour nous soustraire à l'examen du Parlement. Monsieur le Président, depuis que les libéraux sont élus, et j'ai relu et relu pour ma personne et pour voir qu'est-ce qu'il en était, parce que le premier ministre du Canada, qu'on connaît aujourd'hui, nous a donné comme promesse d'être plus transparent, d'être plus cool. Plus cool, tout le monde le sait, il prend tellement de photos que tout le monde le sait. Mais aujourd'hui, je voudrais demander à ma consoeur, est-ce que le Parlement d'aujourd'hui est vraiment aussi transparent que le premier ministre du Canada nous l'avait promis?
Honourable member for Portage-Lisker.
Well, I think my honourable colleague, who, by the way, has just been doing such an amazing job working for her constituents and doing a great job in this House, she's bang on. And she is seeing something that I think so many Canadians are seeing. People who voted for the Liberal government, thinking that they could trust what this Prime Minister said, wanting to give him a chance. I think they are realizing and seeing that he has failed to keep his word on so many issues, not just the issue around respecting Parliament, not just around the issue around using his majority to ram things through this House, not allow for debate. On issues of balancing the budget, Mr. Speaker, Canadians are seized with the impact of his reckless spending. On issues around ethics and transparency, again, as I mentioned earlier in my speech, we have a Prime Minister for the first time in history who has been found guilty of breaking four parts of the Conflict of Interest Act. On fiscal responsibility, we see this government taxing Canadians. Canadians are paying more for everything because of this government. Every time electoral reform, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has betrayed veterans, Mr. Speaker, on every front. Everything this Prime Minister touches seems to fail. Everything this Prime Minister says he's going to do fails. And he may have thought he was going to try hard. He may have thought that if he put his hand on his heart and was very sincere, it would work, but it's failed. This is a failure as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.